Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Literature Channel. And this video on the top 10 greatest books of all time. So, I often get asked when people find out that I teach literature, can you recommend one book to start my journey on reading good literature? And it's always puts me in a bit of a bind. I have to think of one and why I would pick that one. So I thought I'd do this video of the top 10 of all time. And any of these books that I'm about to recommend would be good places to start if people are thinking of starting a journey of reading the good books of the tradition. A couple of things about the list. I've limited myself to one title per author. So depending on your tastes, someone might have put in a couple by Shakespeare or Homer, both the Iliad and the Odyssey. But I've limited myself to one title per author. I've tried to also represent to some extent the whole range, historical range of the Western tradition. So often, if you Google top greatest 100 greatest books, and I've seen these lists, it's often just 20th century novels and maybe a couple of 19th century novels. So first of all, it's limited in terms of its genre. It's just novels, and it's really just the last 100 years or so, and maybe 150 years if you're lucky. This is representing the whole range of the tradition, both in terms of genre, so epic, drama, as poetry, as well as novels, philosophy, some religious texts. And its historical breadth will be broader than those lists, just given what I think is important if someone's going to start a journey on the great books. And then finally, it's the Western tradition. That's the tradition I know. It's not to disparage other traditions. It's just that I can't speak knowledgeably about those traditions, and I do believe there's a certain coherence and a certain reason to ground oneself if one lives within the Western tradition in the thought and the great articulations of how one should live their life. That is the Western tradition. So that's my top 10. Tell me in the comments if I've missed some, if there's others that you think I should put in there, or if there's ones that you think that shouldn't be on there. I'll also put in the description, I'll put links to, I have a longer list. I have a couple of longer lists. I have a list of 101 greatest books of the Western tradition. I also have a extensive list of the 1001 books that one should try to read in one's lifetime. I'm trying to read. I haven't gotten through the whole list. It's in an Excel pivot table that allows some neat analysis by language, by country of the author. And the other thing I'll mention is quickly a couple of points on how to read these books. I want to do another video on how to read the great books in a bit more depth, but just in passing. And people who've heard me talk about how to read the great books will hear these points come up again and again. So the first point is that these are books that need to be read multiple times. These texts are so rich. They have multiple layers of meaning. There's a richness to be explored that only multiple readings can help you to start to unfold and unwrap. And every one of the works that we're about to go through, I've read multiple times, and every time I see whole new aspects of meaning, of points that force me to question certain beliefs, and this happens every time I read these works. Also, I would say approach the works in the mindset that I'm not reading this just as entertainment. So people, I think, often think of reading as what what can I kick off my sandals at the beach and sit back and while the hours as just a way of relaxing. I think the way to encounter the great books is these are works that have something to potentially teach me, to educate me, to improve my soul. And they can be entertaining, but they're not just entertaining. I would say also the key point, key kind of technical approach to reading these works is always use marginalia. So as you go through, I like to mark that work up. I like to put into the side of what I'm reading thoughts on what are the questions that I'm being asked here? What are some of the thematic points that are being raised in the text, so that when I go back to that work, some of that thinking's already there. I can kind of take a shortcut to arriving at those questions again, or I can return to the text later and try to summarize what I think I've gotten out of it. So I think one needs to have some sort of system of marginalia, of marking off portions of the text and of recording as one goes one's reflections. Um, and finally, I think in reading these works, because they're challenging, because they require of the reader so much, that it helps to have good commentary. It helps to go to the work again after reading other reflections, other analysis of the work. So try to think try to find good commentaries on these. And when I say good commentaries, I mean generally ones that are not trying to impose ideological frameworks of the present on these works from the past. So they're not trying to take a certain political ism of the present and trying to, let's say, critique the past based on that ism. Why would I say that? Well, it's not going to help too much in terms of trying to allow what that work is revealing to you for the first time. It's basically imposing the standards that you know on the work. So in where pertinent, as I go through the list, I'll highlight, I think, a commentary that might be useful for you. Think of the commentaries as not having the right answer. I don't think there's one answer, one way of interpreting these works. I think there's, obviously, as I said, there's a rich depth and levels of meaning in each one of these works. But a good commentary should provide the type of dialogue with your own thoughts that helps you to articulate your own impressions for the first time. So that's what I look for in a good commentary. So without further ado, let's get to the top 10. And when I say top 10, they haven't been really ranked, but I have them listed, let us say, historically from earliest to most recent. So number one, and I think we need to start with the Bible. Okay. So here it's a bit of a, let's say, a cheat here, because it's not really one book. It's dozens of books. But for the purposes of this list, I think we need to, of course, include the Bible. And what I have here is the Oxford Annotated Bible. So this would be the New Revised Standard Version. I recommend, especially if you're studying English literature, to also have the King James Version. I will also mention that when it comes to the Hebrew Bible, for Christians, called the Old Testament, an excellent translation in 3 volumes has come out relatively recently by Robert Alter. translation of the Hebrew Bible. Well worth the price of admission. Just the translation is has a literary sensitivity, but also his notes are very acute. In terms of a commentary on the Bible, what I have behind me here is 12-volume New Interpreter's Bible. It includes the text, the New International Version, includes the New Revised Standard Version, as well as extensive commentary on each section. So why the Bible? Well, just in terms of its own literary quality, it has has such a collection of memorable tales, histories, poetry, um, epistles, thought-provoking pieces, um, just in its literary quality. As a sacred text, it's obviously immeasurably important for believers within the Judeo-Christian tradition. Also, in terms of its influence on the rest of the tradition, it's incalculable. So one can't really say undertake uh, studies within the Western tradition without some understanding of the Bible and its influence. In terms of the overall theme of the Bible, if we were to take it as one book, it's the tale of God's unfolding in time in relation to humanity and humanity's repeated, let's say, falling away from God, but God's plan for humanity to ultimately reconnect with God in the end. In terms of, if I were to pick out one passage, a memorable quote, I always think of Exodus 3:14. Hopefully, I can find it here. So Exodus 3:14, Moses is being commanded by Yahweh to return to Pharaoh to free the Israelite people from captivity. And Moses says, well, what if I'm told, okay, what is the name of this God that has sent you, Moses? And Yahweh replies, and God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. So this is a translation of Yaheh Asher Yeheh, which in Hebrew could be the present tense or the future tense. So Robert Alter translates it, I will be who I will be. So here translated as I am who I am. And this divine name not only is, it's a way of God naming himself for the first time, so to speak, to the ancient Israelites, but it's also a way of thinking about the difference between the Hebrew tradition that so importantly informs the Western tradition as a whole and the Greek tradition, let's say the other important pillar of the Western tradition. So that Greek classical pillar gives birth to philosophy, and that we can know the cosmos and we can study it. And the Hebrew tradition, the tradition of revelation, is kind of founded on this notion that God is this mystery. I will be who I will be, and your knowing, your attempts to control nature, to control me, are futile. So that is of course an immeasurably important work as a whole. That's an important passage, an important aspect of our coming to understand God in that text. So that's the first work I would highlight. The second work I would highlight is Homer's Iliad. Now, this work is another incalculably important work in terms of its influence on uh, later tradition, later works, later epics, later poetry, later ballads, later novels. Uh, Also, in itself, it's a profound reflection on war, mortality, trying to find meaning in the finitude of human existence. So the Iliad repays again countless readings in terms of the underlining of those themes. Um, there's not really one in terms of a commentary I'd point to. There's not really one commentary to underscore. I would say that I found Professor Elizabeth Vandiver's lectures that are available through the Great Courses. I found those immeasurably valuable. Um, I do have, I'll put in the description, links to my own lectures on Homer's Iliad. I will say that there are a couple of essays by Seth Bernardetti that are also useful, but there's really no one work that I'll point to. Um, in terms of uh, a memorable quote that I'll point you to, if I can find it here. This is from Book 6. Glaucus and Diomedes have encountered one another on the battlefield and are exchanging information about themselves. And Glaucus says, "High-hearted son of Tydeus is Diomedes, why ask about my birth? Like the generations of leaves, the lives of mortal men. Now the wind scatters the old leaves across the earth. Now the living timber bursts with the new buds, and spring comes round again. And so with men, as one generation comes to life, another dies away." So, uh, and that's by from the translation by Robert Fagles in this edition. So, I think a powerful statement of that theme of mortality and finitude, that human existence is like the leaves of a tree, and that each generation passes away, and the Iliad really forces us to ask that question of, if that's the case, if our human lives are really no more enduring and no more meaningful than these leaves as they flourish and then pass away, what is the meaning, and how does one find enduring meaning in our human existence? And the Iliad is a powerful reflection on that. The third book, again from the ancient Greeks, that I think one has to read, and again bears multiple readings, and is rewarding each time, is Plato's Republic. This is the translation I would certainly recommend is this translation by Alan Bloom. And in terms of commentary, Bloom was a student of this person that I'm recommending, is a student of Leo Strauss. In this text, The City and Man, Leo Strauss has an excellent commentary on the Republic. It's Strauss and Bloom take an approach which I think is a profitable one of paying attention to the fact that Plato's dialogues are dramas. So what's happening with the action of the within the dialogue, as opposed to trying to just take out Socrates' statements as philosophical truths, trying to read the dialogue almost like a philosophical treatise for the Platonic the Platonic principles or philosophical axioms that are there. They're not. They're statements made within a context in response to a particular question, to a particular type of character, etc. So the themes of the Republic are generally, at least on the face of it, the question of justice, but also the philosophic life and what is the good life, so to speak. And the Republic contains significant reflections on that. I won't point to one quote, but I would, in terms of a passage that I'll point you to as a way of uh, entering the Republic. Of course, the allegory of the cave in Book 7 of the Republic is a good place to start. So for those of you who most of you have probably come across this before, but Socrates relates there an allegory, an image for a way of thinking about the education and what he calls the lack of education of humans in society, and he likens that the image he uses to try to articulate and bring forth this education and lack of education that we have in humans is an image of humans in a cave, and all they can see is shadows before them on the cave, and the philosophic life is like being released from those that bondage within the cave, being dragged and forced to come to the the sunshine outside of the cave, so to speak. But then we have to return to the cave in this image, in this allegory, and let's say the cave is existence as we know it in the everyday world, in society, and the images and the opinions that the people hold in society. So we have to come back and, let's say, try to take whatever reflections, whatever insights one has gleaned from outside the cave, bring it back and somehow negotiate, convince, interact with the world in that shadowy cave like existence. um, it's it's a poignant image in that in describing it, Socrates says, wouldn't the person who returns from being outside the cave and realizes that this is the true world, that this trees are really outside there and that the shadows on the cave wall are really just shadows of trees, wouldn't he seem crazy to the people inside the cave? When he comes back and he starts talking about these things, he'll seem crazy, and they may in fact want to hurt him. They and it's a poignant, let's say, description of this dilemma of the philosopher in relationship to the community. And we know that, of course, Plato's writing this after, but Socrates himself would later have to drink hemlock at the uh, uh, due to his say crimes against the Athenian people in their eyes. So that's an important work. The Republic, as I said, bears multiple multiple rereadings as well. The next work, also from the classical tradition, but this time from classical Rome, I'll point to Virgil's Aeneid. Maybe my second favorite book of all time. We're gonna get to my favorite book soon, but maybe my second favorite book of all time. This is again the Robert Fagel's translation. Um, in terms of commentary, I have some videos I'll point to. There's not really one work, but I would point to. It's another one where there's probably several, but there's one that I'll point to. Um, Eve Adler's Virgil's Empire, um, and it's less for the fact that I agree with everything that Eve Adler says there, but more so, and again, this is the point of good commentary as dialogue and opening up different aspects of the work. Um, Eve Adler's point of departure is that Virgil is um, not necessarily being totally forthright in what he says in the Aeneid about what is valuable about Rome, about the gods, about piety, and that he's really following a kind of an atheism and a materialism of Lucretius, and that this is kind of the unsaid or the esoteric truth underneath a exoteric surface. So I think there's something to that. I do think Virgil's ultimately wants us to see the value of Rome, but wants to, and this is what I'll concede to Adler is, but wants to challenge Rome to do better, so to speak. I think part of the Aeneid is Virgil wanting us to see um, the fall of Troy as very similar, and the crimes that the Greeks committed and described, the crimes described so harrowingly in Book 2 of the Aeneid. Um, wants to see, wants the Roman audience to see that as akin to the destruction of Carthage, and for the Romans to remind themselves of their higher calling. And so I do think that there's something to what Eve Adler is saying, but I do believe that the ultimate message of piety, of taking on their burdens and their duties as individuals within society, but also Rome as a city and an empire, is kind of the ultimate message of the Aeneid. Now we'll leave the, let's say, the ancient world, enter the medieval beginning of the Renaissance, and for the fifth work, uh, Dante's Divine Comedy. This translation is by John Charity. I'm not totally wed to any one translation of this work. I've seen merits in a few that I've seen. I like this because it happens to be in one volume as opposed to separate volumes. I found the notes to with each canto to be handy, to be informative and well placed. So I would recommend that volume as much as the next. And in Dante's Divine Comedy, why would I put it on the list? Well, the Divine Comedy, in addition to, let's say, articulating an entire medieval worldview and almost systematically kind of presenting that world and that cosmos, it's also a thoughtful, I think, makes one think, a thoughtful reflection on what is the meaning of life. And that's where Dante the Pilgrim finds himself at the beginning, is halfway through that journey. And what we see, even if one's not a believing Christian and believes, let's say, all of the uh, medieval Christian mythology, even if one doesn't subscribe to that, I think we can see the descriptions of those in the inferno and those in purgatory, and how those who are, let's say, chained to their vices, chained to their sins. I think we can see in those images of kind of a universal message of what it's like to be apart from one's true course, one's true home. And when one knows that one's strayed, and like I said, whether it's within say, a rigidly Christian framework, or your own sense of what is good for you, what's good for your family, what is good for your highest ideals, whether it's your ideals of your community, your family, of your profession, what have you. Um, when we see these sinners, we see these sinners in contexts that provide vivid imagery and kind of a dramatic unfolding of what it feels like, the phenomenology, so to speak, of falling away from the path. And then with the Paradiso, the imagery and the what it feels like when one is in the light of the path, so to speak. So it's in that sense, I think it's a way of if we take it beyond its uh, explicitly Christian grounding, I think it's a universal message of trying to stay on the right path. For the sixth work, well, we had to get to Shakespeare eventually, right? And I would pick Shakespeare's Hamlet. Okay, so what can you say about Shakespeare's Hamlet? It's one of Shakespeare's probably most famous plays, one of his most profound plays. Um, Obviously, there's this theme going throughout of mortality, but also and you can see it in the most famous speech, "To Be or Not to Be," reflections on, let's say, being and non-being, silence and words, and what is revealed and what is concealed, this world and another world, metaphysical reflections uh, about about being and non-being, but also about the human place within that intersection of being and non-being. Um, I don't think there's any one work of commentary that captures that thematic, let's say, fully enough. Not that any one commentary ever could. I think the essays in this Norton edition are a good place to start. I'll also provide a link to my own lecture notes on the play, and I'll point. I won't read the full quote, but in terms of points of entry, of course, there's the soliloquy in Act 3, Scene 1, "To Be or Not to Be." But I also point people to Act 5, Scene 2, where Hamlet says, and maybe this is kind of the ultimate conclusion of that question of between to be and not to be, between trying to find meaning in being or non-being, is Hamlet says, "Let be." Okay, and that there's a certain providence in the fall of a sparrow, and that maybe we have to uh, let go of, let's say, the modern enterprise and its um, uh, designs for trying to calculate and control these things, that we have to take a certain stoic, uh, apathetic, not in the sense of we don't care, but in the sense of we're not going to try to control the things we don't control, that there's a certain divine providence behind all of these things, that they will work out in the way that they need to work out, and that God has a plan for these things. So I do think that there's that potentiality, at least at the end of the play, uh, to reflect on and kind of refer back to the earlier speech. So I said we would get to my favorite work, and probably my favorite work of all time, John Milton's Paradise Lost, and it's just this again with. Uh, I don't think there's one work of commentary that I would point to, but the probably the one that I refer to the most in terms of making headway on it is Stanley Fish's "Surprised by Sin." So this is probably over 50 years old now. This work of criticism, and it's definitely still probably the best work of criticism on Milton's work. So the problem often arises in Paradise Lost. Is Satan supposed to be the good guy here? Is so. For those of you who don't know, right? It's the tale of God creating the universe, and then the fall of these fallen angels led by Satan, and then Satan's plan to force Adam and Eve to eat from the forbidden tree and create their fall, and that's thus Paradise Lost. They lost Eden. Um, Yet for a good portion of the epic, what we see, and instead of Satan as some evil, disgusting creature that uh, needs to be eschewed, we see Satan portrayed as an epic hero, compared to an Achilles, compared to an Aeneas, the epic heroes of the classical tradition. So why is Milton creating Satan and presenting Satan in this way. And I think Fish's approach is a good one to that question. So one approach has always been, okay, well, you're reading it wrong. Milton wants us to be kind of Orthodox Christians, and just forget about that part. And the message of the entire epic is that one needs to be Orthodox Christian. Then the other side, let's say the Satanist approach, has always been, well, he wants us to to paraphrase from the Rolling Stones song, to show sympathy for the devil. Fish kind of cuts between them both and says they're both in a way right. So what's interesting is that he does want us to show sympathy for the devil, but that's only part of the temptation. We're surprised by sin because early on, when we see Satan, we're surprised when we remind ourselves that it's so easy to get sucked in by sin. So there is a tempting aspect of the presentation of Satan, but the goal is to educate us towards the orthodox end. So I think Fish's analysis there is amazing, and justifiably, I think the kind of the greatest epic in the English tradition, at least, and as I said, for my money, the greatest epic within the tradition itself. So Paradise Lost, the seventh work in our list. The eighth work, we'll move up to the 19th century now. The Paradise Lost is the final edition in 1674. So we'll move ahead a couple hundred years to the 19th century and George Eliot's Middlemarch. So again, no one piece of commentary that I'll point to, but the essays in the Norton edition are as good a place as any to start. I would say that the thematic kind of point of entry for me has always been kind of the notion of imaginative sympathy, the ethics of the sympathizing with another perspective, and just one memorable quote from the work, and I won't try to find it, but it goes something like, it's a narrow mind which cannot look at a subject from various points of view. And I think that kind of is a good way of summarizing the ethical message of the novel. George Eliot was one of the pioneers of the multi-plot novel, and we get the sense that all these lives, not just the main character, it's not just a book about one main character. All these lives have their own points of view, and they're important, and it's important for us as readers to find ourselves seeing the world through their eyes, and to displace, let us say, our own egocentric perspective. And another quote, and this is from chapter 42, I believe, is something like, there's no greater blot or blinding spot than self. So the self can get in the way of how we see the world. So an excellent novel. And I haven't fully unpacked this, but I know Eliot studied philosophy deeply, and Spinoza's ethics deeply. And there's definitely an ethical mission in this novel. And as I said, I haven't connected the dots to her philosophical reading fully, but I know there are scholars that have tried to do this. But definitely the novel itself is this working out in the real world of how ethical obligations that we have with one another are enacted, and in this small kind of, the subtitle is this, study of provincial life, and how it's enacted in this small provincial town. So for the ninth work, another one of my favorites. Well, I guess they're all my favorites in this top 10, but more I think about it, more kind of profound this work is Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, and in terms of commentary on this, I've always found this work useful. It's called Political Apocalypse. This is a library, University of Ottawa Library is lending me this, uh, by Ellis Sandoz, and um, and I would say that what's uh, so profound about Dostoevsky's work is um, is confrontation with the materialism, the nihilism that he was seeing in 19th century Russia, kind of set of intellectuals that had lost their way, or kind of had lost their way in terms of trying to find meaning for their lives, for the lives of their for the lives of the people as a community. The kind of, let's say, the challenge, the uh, Dostoevsky said in some of his letters and writings around the work, said that he tried to articulate as profoundly as he could the challenge of atheism, nihilism, and we see that stated in the form of Ivan's uh, tale of the Grand Inquisitor. You know, this tale of um, a Grand Inquisitor who doesn't need Christ. He doesn't need, let's say, the embodiment of God on this earth. That humanity's solved the problem, and that um, the reason that they've solved the problem, that the church has solved the problem and doesn't need Christ, is because Christ's message to humanity is that they are free, and that they need to do these things to be holy and to be one with God. And the Grand Inquisitor points out, well, no, that's fine for you, but and maybe a couple of others, but the mass of humanity is too weak to do these things. We are not going to challenge them to do this. We're going to give them bread, and we're going to give them miracles, and they won't be forced to try to go down this sort of path. So so this is, let's say, a challenge to not only, let's say, the Orthodox Church, but it's a challenge to a notion that we can have, let's say, higher spiritual ideals. That we merely limited by kind of material objectives, these types of things. So that's the challenge as articulated in the Grand Inquisitor. The the response is provided in, I think, there's the life of Zosima as well as in Alyosha, and what we see there is uh, two lives that, each in their own way, combine this spiritual freedom, the freedom to be spiritual, but with a capacity to love their fellow humans. Okay, and this has been, let's say, a challenge that for Dostoevsky ever since his earlier work, the Notes from Underground. So, Notes from Underground, we have this underground man who wants to be free and distances himself from expectations of the world, but is unable to love and care for others. So how can you combine that freedom with love for others? And what we see is, in the Brothers Karamazov, is this notion that that we have to take on the burden of our brothers and the burden of the world, so to speak. And it's a profound novel that takes on those types of deep spiritual questions, that forces one to think about the kind of the ultimate meaning behind one's existence. And again, one of these great works that bears multiple reading. And then for the final work, I would pick, this is the Portable Nietzsche, but within this one can find the Walter Kaufmann translation of Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So for our final work, the work written from 1883 to 1885, in terms of commentary, I can think of nothing finer than Lawrence Lampert's Nietzsche's teaching. Just section by section, thoughtful analysis, decoding of a lot of Nietzsche's cryptic imagery and references. So, Thus Spoke Zarathustra is a work of philosophy, but literary at the same time. It has to be read, and Lawrence Lampert does read it this way, as a drama. And so, remember, I talked about uh, Plato's Republic, and that we have to think about it as a drama. And that's Lampert's approach to Thus Spoke Zarathustra as well, and I think a profitable one. And if I were to let's say what's the theme of the work as well is overcoming nihilism. Again, similar problem to Dostoevsky's, but let's say faced in a more let's say philosophical way as opposed to let's say spiritual. Um, for Nietzsche, nihilism is kind of this culmination of a certain way of thinking from Platonism, from Christianity, etc. That denies this world and tries to put everything in another world. So how do we find value in this existence? And the their answers are, let's say, serial. They we have different answers in each part of the work. There's four parts, and the first part, the answer seems to be the Overman. The Übermensch is overcoming humanity, and then in the second part we have this first utterance of this new concept of will to power, and that seems to provide a code to how this will unlock all these problems. And then in the third part, rather than the Übermensch or will to power, what is the central teaching seems to be, or is the eternal recurrence of the same. And writing later about his work, Nietzsche did say that the book ultimately is about this, the eternal recurrence of the same. Now, I don't know if I agree totally, and if I get whether or not that could be an answer to this question of nihilism and how do we find meaning in our existence. But it certainly, as a work, thought provoking. It certainly makes us confront these questions, makes us think deeply about to what extent nihilism is a defining feature of our culture, of our own lives. If there is a possibility to find meaning by accepting this moment as the only moment, and not trying to wish beyond it. So it's definitely worth reading, and worth reading closely, and again multiple times, for that reason. Just kind of a personal anecdote that when I think of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, I have two close friends who we have regular book clubs, and look at a lot of these great works together. And the first book that we got together around was Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and we had more time in our hands then, so we would meet weekly after work, and we would go through one section. So there's around 66 sections in all of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I think we only got through half of them, but we would half of the work. But we would spend weeks on just one section, just going over it, and then we'd move on to the next section. And we did this for a couple of years, and so it just kind of an example of the type of depth one can get out of every word of Nietzsche. But I could say the same for all of the works on that we looked at this list. So there you have it. The top 10 greatest books of all time, from my humble opinion. As I said, let me know in the comments what's missing, what you would add, what you would take off. and why. So I hope this is useful as you do your own endeavors to try to grapple with the great books of the tradition. Thank you, everyone.